And this is the follow-up page for this program. So every time we do this, we have a follow-up page so that you'll be able to view the video. And this page will also have a lot of other information that we might discuss tonight. Anything that comes up that any of our presenters mentioned as a resource, I'll make sure to add it to that page so that you'll have the link. You'll also find bios on our presenters and their contact information and so on. Just a reminder that we also have a parent support group that meets every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. There's where you can find out more information about that group. Actually, Tessa will share links to both of those that I just mentioned in your in the chat box. This one and this one. Tessa, if you can grab those, that would be great. And there are other meetings that take place on different nights. So if Wednesday is not open to you, then definitely check out that page because we have other ones listed on the tape that are normally in other locations, but they're all online right now. This program is coming up next week. We've been holding this on the last Tuesday of every month, and I really love the opportunity to talk about various pathways. And this time we're going to be talking about supporting recovery. So we'll have some wonderful stories of how people can stay connected, different kinds of support groups, online, probably, and in most cases right now, but many other things like we're going to talk about mindfulness and meditation, and somebody from Phoenix will be with us, which is a really great fitness program for people in recovery. Mike Blanche will be with us to talk about outpatient programs. So we have some really great stuff lined up for next week as well. And also finally need to thank our very good friends at Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. They are funding tonight's program, so thank you so much to them. We really, really appreciate their ongoing support. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Greeley. Oh, one more last thing, sorry. When the program finishes, when you stop watching this evening, you'll see a little prompt to take a survey. We really appreciate your feedback, even if you've provided us with feedback before. We love to hear from you about each of our programs. So thanks so much. Sorry, thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Kim. Good evening, everybody. My name is Katie Greeley. I use she, her pronouns. I am thrilled to be here with this the panelists tonight to discuss a really, really important topic that is near and dear to my heart. That is the LGBTQIA community and the intersection of substance use and how this community is, impacted due to facing certain risk factors due to who they are. I'm going to start off tonight's discussion with a series visuals. I'm a visual learner, so I would like to just I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through kind of setting the tone and the foundation of knowledge for tonight's discussion, and then I will hand it over to the rest of the panelists. Feel free at any moment if you have a question, if you have, would like clarification, to enter that question into the chat box. You won't be interrupting us, and that way we can answer your question as we continue to go through our program tonight. So, here we go. All right. So, first off, let me say this. It says LGBTQ2IA+. Something about this population that, as an ally, right? And everyone that is watching this program tonight, you are engaging in allyship by learning how to be a better support for those individuals who identify as LGBTQ2IA+ in the world, right? So this is an area in which the language is constantly evolving and changing. And if you feel like you can't keep up, but you're trying, you're doing a good job. So I learned, and I've been doing this work with queer individuals, and I'm using queer as an umbrella term for about 8 years now. I just learned about the 2 in the LGBTQ2IA this week. And so what that stands for is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, two-spirit, intersex, and asexual. And so when we're talking, what we discussed when you saw the flyer for tonight's program was, why is this population at higher risk? And the answer isn't because they're queer. It's because live in a society where homophobia and transphobia and queerphobia exist, right? So being gay, being trans, being bisexual is not within itself a risk factor, but living in those societies where you're not supported and you are a victim of experiencing minority stress is what leads to these disparities in substance use. I'm not going to read the slide verbatim, it's right there for you, but I think that's just really important to kind of just start off with saying it's not being queer, it's living in a society that might not support you. And when it comes to why individuals reach for alcohol or other drugs, there are several different ways that this could look, especially depending on, if you belong to, if you identify as gay, but you're also a gay Black man, or you're a trans Black woman, or, there's different intersections and different experiences within different marginalized populations that might increase your risk level. So we're just going to start off with that, kind of setting the tone. But when we look at specific risk factors, we live in a society where for those who choose to come out of the closet, that is a stressor. And that is something depending on where they are at in their lives and how they present themselves interpersonally, to their colleagues, to their peers, to their family, could vary. The fear of rejection, not just for young people, which we know, when you're young, the thing you want most in the world, one of the things that you want most in the world, right, is just to be accepted, to be loved, to fit in. And we know that a lot of young people will make unhealthy choices when it comes to what it means for them, or what they feel, or what they perceive it is for them to help them fit in, right? So, and the fear of rejection in terms of friend groups, right, can be really traumatic. But and being bullied in school, and physical and verbal harassment are real, but also, oftentimes we're also leaving out the violent act of kicking somebody out of your home, youth who experience homelessness, queer individuals that experience homelessness. And so that's also something else to consider. Dealing with the trauma of being abused for who you are, verbally, sexually, physically. We know one of the causes for substance use is trauma, right? So these individuals who have had this experience, who have not been supported in their lives by their peers, family, colleagues, whomever, that puts them at a higher risk for reaching for alcohol and other drug use. When we're looking more specifically at the transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, gender expansive, whatever you want to call it, right? Again, this language is constantly evolving. We're looking at risk factors that we can nail down a little bit more, which I mean is like misgendering and dead naming, which is constant invalidation of that individual's identity. Bathroom anxiety, especially if, and young people and adults experience this as well. But especially if you're in a, climate where, there are no gender neutral bathrooms or gender inclusive bathrooms, or, there's a constant fear for a lot of individuals of experiencing violence if they were used the bathroom that doesn't, individuals perceive that is not assigned to them. And then body dysmorphia. And so when we look at body dysmorphia, it varies individual to individual. There is a lot of, I would say, a lot of people, when they talk about body dysmorphia in the trans community, some individuals say like body dysmorphia is a requirement for transition, which is not always true, or body dysmorphia usually leads to suicidal ideation, which is accurate, but that's not everyone's experience, right? There's a couple of things about body dysmorphia. It is a very individual experienced personal, sorry, my Siri was activated. It is a very, it's very dependent on the individual and their relationship with their body and how they present their gender. Not always, you know, female to male, male to female. You know, there's also those individuals that might identify as gender expansive or non-binary, that live in between, that want different things for their body. Something to note, right, when we're looking at younger individuals, tweens and teens, my work with them, you'll see a lot of more severe increased anxiety and depression as they start to enter the tanner stages of puberty, as they start to experience the dominant hormone that was, you know, that is associated with their sex assigned at birth. And that can really start to become a risk factor in terms of mood and suicidal thoughts. And so again, this varies to individual, but these are some just concrete risk factors that we can think of. Anxiety and depression, right? Mental health. Obviously, we know the link there between how that puts an individual at a higher risk to use substances if they don't have the support that they need, if they don't have coping skills to manage that anxiety, stress, depression on their own. All right, so when we talk about gender identity and sexuality, I know I said, you know, the LGBTQIA, right? It's kind of an umbrella term. But gender identity and sexuality are two different things. And I love this slide. It's, you know, this is a Venn diagram, right? So, and this takes a lot for people to wrap their minds around at first, you know, and when people are really starting to, you know, want to be as informed as they can, and you learn that someone can be a male who decides to transition into a female, but still be attracted to females and still be romantically interested in females, that can, you know, that's a lot. So when we look at this, gender is who you are, who you identify up here, right, as up here. Gender expression is how you express that, right? And that can be different for everybody. And then sexuality is who you're attracted to. And then sexual behavior, right, is who you decide to engage in sexual behavior with, right? So these are like very different things. And again, very personal to each individual. Okay, so, you know, there are, you know, we do have to be realistic about these risk factors and that these individuals face. And so when it comes to suicide, and this data is from the Williams Institute, right? When we look at attempts, right? This isn't suicidal ideation. This isn't had fleeting thoughts of suicide. This is actual attempts, right? I think this picture is very powerful because, you know, when we look at the TGNC, transgender nonconforming population, 41% have actually engaged in an attempt. When we look at lesbian, gay, and bisexual, it goes to 20%, and then we compare that to the overall population, it's at 4.6%, right? Again, I'm not going to go too much into this, but I feel that, you know, it speaks for itself. As it relates specifically to substance use, these are some of the risk factors why these individuals are at higher risk to consume, to binge drink, to more likely to use marijuana, more likely to use cigarettes, IV drug use. Again, these are alarming numbers. And I felt like this visual itself didn't do it justice. So I have a visual that I put together that is not the prettiest to look at. I'm going to warn you all right now. But I think, again, it highlights those disparities between LGBT and non-LGBTQIA individuals. So this, I warned you, it wasn't pretty to look at. But in the pink and purple, right, are LGBT students. And so this is data from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So it's a survey done by the CDC. And it's actually a really great tool. If you ever go on their website, you can separate, you know, risky behavior in terms of they measure every risk you could think of that adolescents might be gauging in, but adolescents specifically, when we're looking at youth, right? And I'm focusing on youth because I'm more familiar with working with youth specifically. But when we look at youth, right, and when it comes to substance use, we know individuals who start using alcohol or their drugs, before the age of 18 are at higher risk for going on to developing those substance use disorders. So this is why this youth data matters so much. The pink and purple are LGB students, and it breaks it up between current and have ever tried. Again, I don't need to go over every number, but when you look at the difference between non-LGB students, it's jarring. One thing that I think we need to think about as a society and as healthcare providers within this field, and is there's not too much data on the trans and gender nonconforming population. Why is that? Well, many of these surveys that have existed for years and years and years don't have those options when individuals start filling out a survey they're taking it, right? Like the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey is one of those surveys. Another survey that monitors substance use specifically is Monitoring the Future, right? They don't ask about gender or sex assigned at birth. And so, we know that the trans community, those numbers are higher, but we don't have the data quite yet in comparing it to non-LGB individuals. Right, and one thing to note, right, this is aggregate data. When it's lumping lesbian, gays, and bisexuals together. This looks different when you look at lesbians specifically, gay men specifically, or bisexuals specifically. And I'll talk a little bit about that before I hand it over in a moment. Again, another graphic that I thought was just really important to look at, right? So we look at youth specifically. And I'm focusing on youth here. I know we're talking about the whole LGBTQIA population, but many queer individuals are working through the traumatic experiences that they had when they were young, that lack of acceptance, that being abused verbally or bullied, and that carries into their adulthood. And once they've worked through that, it has impacted their relationships, their romantic relationships, their personal relationships. If and I'm not speaking for everyone, but it is a risk factor there. And so when we look at these numbers specifically, and the dark blue is middle school and the light blue is high school, right? 82% of middle schoolers have heard homophobic remarks, or 91% of both middle schoolers and high schoolers have heard gay used in a negative way, and over and over and over again. And what does that do, at the age when you're really starting to figure out who you are, right? Those messages again and again that who you are is negative and not okay. Another figure, and I apologize for the quality of the graphic itself, right? But again, it's just looking at actual harassment, and it compares verbal and physical harassment. So again, jarring numbers, certainly. And then something else that's really important that I want to kind of touch on real quick, and that's availability of LGBTQIA resources, visibility, curriculum, right? Do they have the opportunity through the community that the school that they attend, to see themselves in the curriculum? And we're seeing this start to change for many different reasons, but it's so important that these young people have an idea, of that successful versions, gay and queer and trans individuals go on to live productive, healthy, successful lives. And how is that represented in their curriculum in school? How much is it talked about? I know one thing that, with a lot of the adolescents that I work with, when I talk about finding out, how did they begin to explore their identity, or what was that experience like for them? It is resources that they went out and found on their own through the internet, right? They found queer and community on the internet before they ever found it in person. And so how can, as a protective factor, I listed a bunch of risk factors earlier at the beginning of my talk, right? As a protective factor, right, wanting to give these kids, a healthy development, how can we make sure that they're seen and they see examples of success and happiness and joy within the queer community? So this is really important. All right, so I'm about to kind of wrap it up real quick. But all I wanted to say is, we got I'm excited to hear all the panelists speak and based on all of their interaction and experience working with this population. My population that I feel the most comfortable working with is young queer teenagers and adults, and with specifically looking at trans individuals and gender expansive individuals. But when we look at the LGBTQIA umbrella, right? Each population under this umbrella, care for them looks different. Affirming care for them looks different. Like I said earlier, the gay male experience is not the same as a two-spirited indigenous person's experience when it comes to queerness. It's just not. There's different risk factors there, right? So when it comes to providing an affirming care or supporting that individual, it's really understanding that they're the expert on their experience. And when we're seeking, if an individual is at risk or an individual is seeking out treatment, we got to look at, is, this organization or this, rehab just saying, yes, we do everything, or can they say, yes, we have this history of working with this population and this is what that looks like, right? So, we need to honor diverse experiences under this umbrella, and we gotta be realistic about the certain risks to each of these individual populations, and also honor that again the intersectionalities and how that shapes identity. Real quickly, I'm just going to go to 2 more slides and I'm going to hand it off. How can we, as I said, I wanted to thank everyone for attending and being here. And I said, the population that I'm most familiar working with are the, trans and gender expansive, non-conforming young individuals. And so what are little things that we can do to support them and be an ally? And that is, again, just, vulnerability is what I'm going to say. And what I mean by that is you're not going to do everything right all the time. And as young people or people in general explore their identity, things are fluid, things change. And so one thing that we know, a risk factor that I identified earlier in my presentation was misgendering or dead naming, right? And so misgendering is when you call an individual who identifies as a certain gender by a pronoun that they do not identify with, right? And so what I always say, I start at the very beginning of the presentation saying, hi, my name is Katie Gurley and my pronouns are she, her. It's okay to ask an individual what their pronouns are. And if you mess up, that's okay too. But if young people especially, or anyone in the queer community really sees that you're trying and making an effort and you correct yourself, that does not go unseen. And that relationship will continue to be a good relationship, right? So what does that look like? If you misgender someone and they correct you, thank them. Don't say I'm sorry. And why is that? Well, if someone calls me he, right, and I say, actually I use she, her pronouns, and they go, oh, I'm so sorry, Katie, I didn't mean to, my bad. I instinctively kind of get I want to say to them, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And then I'm consoling them because they're uncomfortable. If you say, if you thank them, or if you misgender them and you thank them, that's it. They don't have to feel like they have to make you uncomfortable. Individuals who are trans or gender expansive are, their whole lives until they finally are out and feel free to express themselves and who they are are managing their gender presentation to match other people's expectations all the time. So saying that, you know, just a simple thank you instead of I'm sorry, they don't have to manage your discomfort one more time, right? Correct yourself, use the correct pronouns, move on, right? I do a lot of education with individuals in schools and creating a affirming environment within the school community for this population. And nothing is more uncomfortable for a young person or an individual when someone misgenders them and they make a huge, big blow up deal about it, right? And they put that kid on the spot, or they put that person on the spot, and that person does not want, they just want you to move on, use the correct pronouns. They don't want to be, in the spotlight any more than they already were. And then practice. And that is simply, going like, all right, I'm going to see Murphy later. I'm using Murphy as my sister. I'm just using that example. Murphy used they, them pronouns. And so Murphy, when they go to the store, I want them to get me oatmeal, right? So just kind of, and until you see that person, so practice in your head before you see that individual with their correct pronouns, right? And so that's just a little thing that I can kind of, in terms of being supportive, being affirming. And you know what, the crazy thing about this, just this one thing when it comes to dead naming or misgendering a person, right? And dead naming is using, like I said, calling someone by their name assigned at birth rather than the name that they've chosen. Doing this has been proven to reduce suicidal ideation in this population by 65%. Right. So it's little things that, people that work with this population are very aware of, that are considered affirming, that is really necessary for providing the best type of care for this population experiencing, who need that support, whether it's substance use, mental health, and so on. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would love to just continue passing it on, I believe, to Tom. Is that correct?
That is correct. All right. Thank you very much, Katie. And my name is Tom McDermott, and I'm the Regional Resource Director at Care and Treatment Centers. And before I get into that, I'm just going to tell a little bit about myself. So, and I learned a lot. I learned more today, and I'm part of this community, and I'm learning every day. Back in the day, when I came out, it was just you were part of the gay community, and it makes my heart warm to see how much it has evolved, because it's more inclusive now, including so many members of this community, which is so important. So, a lot of those things that you talked about in regards to being bullied and teased and picked on, that was my story, truly was my story. And, I'm blessed to come from a very loving and accepting family. Both of my parents are still alive. I went and visited them this past weekend. They're both in their 80s. And, they accepted me for who I was at a very young age. And I was that little kid that wanted to play with Barbie dolls and not play with trucks or play basketball. And, at my house, it was fine, but at school, it was not. And I remember being called a faggot and a queer and pushed around on the playground, even before I knew what those words meant. And, I didn't understand how much that impacted me until much later in life. So all through elementary school and middle school was probably the worst. We were forced to take gym, and this is back in the early 80s, you had to take gym and you had to play whatever sports they were playing. So it was either flag football or basketball or softball or anything with a ball. And I was awful at all of those things. And, we would pick teams, and I was that kid that got picked last. And so once again, not only, so you don't have to call me a name, but if I'm being picked last, then that's also telling me too, that I'm not good enough. And, I remember being pushed around on the basketball court because I just couldn't dribble a ball. And even to this day, at age 52, I get a knot in my stomach when I walk onto a basketball court. And, and that's just all from the childhood trauma, being bullied, teased, and picked on. And so when I was a teenager, I kind of knew I was different. And so I knew that I liked boys. However, it was in the mid 1980s when the AIDS epidemic was in full swing. And, what you saw in the news, especially in the beginning, that this was a gay disease. And this was God's way of punishing gay people. And so here I am, this gay kid that's already been teased and picked on and not accepted. And now the world is telling me that this is going to be your destiny. So it was a really terrifying time until I got older and discovered alcohol and drugs and gay bars. And that's where I officially came out. And it was all about drinking, dancing, and staying up as you know, as long as you possibly could, you know, and having as many partners as you could. And, you know, I was just at a point in my life where I just didn't care enough about myself. And, you know, fast forward into the early 1990s, I tested positive for HIV. So, you know, that was another like black eye on my, you know, on my life, that, you know, everything that they said was going to happen has now happened. And in 1991, HIV was a death sentence. They didn't have the medications that they had. And so that was the catalyst for my addiction to really, really take off. And back in the early 90s, I used to do my partying in Washington, DC. There was a new drug that had just hit the East Coast. It was huge in California, but it hadn't hit the East Coast yet. And so I was the type of addict that if you gave me something, I would try it. I just didn't care. And so I did this drug, and it was crystal meth. And I remember when I did crystal meth the first time in the early 1990s, I knew that this is all I ever wanted. This is the feeling that I was looking for. It took me out of me, and I felt pretty, I felt sexy, I felt like nobody could say anything bad. It just didn't bother me enough. And that really was the start of the downward spiral. Fast forward to 1995, where I was in a really bad car accident due to crystal meth use, recovered from that, and picked it up again and started injecting it, and crashed and burned and ended up in rehab. And, you know, I remember, and I didn't go to rehab at Caron. I actually went to rehab in a little town in Winchester, Virginia. And I remember when my mother was driving me to rehab, she said, "How do you feel about treatment?" And, you know, all of those years of stuffing those feelings of being teased and bullied and picked on had come right to the surface. And I'm like, I'm absolutely terrified that I'm going to go into this facility where it's going to be a bunch of straight people, and they're going to call me a faggot, they're going to call me a queer, and I'm going to get the shit knocked out of me. That's what I thought was going to happen. And she said, "You know what, like, your life's a disaster, and like, this is the only option we have, so I hope that doesn't happen." And, you know, the experience was okay. I ended up coming out, and for the most part, everyone was accepting, but there were some people that weren't. And, you know, they kind of shunned me to an extent, but I, you know, circled around people who I felt comfortable with. So I was really blessed to get a sponsor in treatment who was openly gay. He would come and give lectures. And so he and I became very close, and he really worked with me about being an openly gay man, HIV positive, in early recovery. And so I made a commitment to him that I would do whatever you say for the first year of my recovery. So about 2 months into my recovery, and I was a disaster. I mean, I was 2 months off of crystal meth. I had no coping skills on how to socialize with people, and I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I still didn't, because I hadn't worked on my stuff from all those years of being bullied, teased, and picked on. So 2 months sober, he said to me, "We're going to go to an HIV retreat in Pennsylvania." And I won't curse on here, but I told him to go F himself. I'm not going to, I'm not going to an HIV retreat, because I'd never looked at that. I mean, I said to him, I'm like, you know, it's bad enough I have to get sober and work on myself. I have never looked at my HIV, and I don't want to. He said, "We're going." So we packed up his car and we went to Pennsylvania, and it ended up being at Caron. Caron had HIV retreats, which, hard to believe that they had started back in the 80s. So this crazy old priest, Kim knows fondly, good old Father Bill, who was passionate about the gay community, started these HIV retreats back in the 80s. And so I got to be part of them, and they had them 3 or 4 times a year. And it basically was a safe place for the LGBTQIA, back then it was just the gay community, a safe place for these people in recovery who were HIV positive and who had AIDS to come to this place and just spend a weekend together to fellowship and just be there for support. And I remember going to that first retreat where there were people who were in the final stages of AIDS coming to this place to be part of this weekend. And there was this one woman by the name of Kathleen that they actually had to carry her in. And she said, I'm sober and I just have to come here just to be around my people. And, you know, that was the first little glimmer of hope this gay HIV positive crystal meth addict had, that maybe there is something to this recovery. So I started coming to these retreats 3 or 4 times a year. And, you know, when things got really bad, I always knew that there was a retreat right around the corner. So I became really good friends with that crazy Catholic priest. He and I became really good friends. And between him and my sponsor, they convinced me that I needed to really do work on myself. So working a 12-step program is great. And for me, it only took me so far, but I had core issues that I had never looked at or dealt with. And that's when I rolled up my sleeves and really started doing the core work. And as frightening and as terrifying and as painful as it was, I did it because I knew that if I was going to stay sober, I was going to have to do that work. And it was difficult work. I had to get in touch with that little kid that got pushed around and bullied and teased and picked on the playground, get in touch with him and heal and do the work around that. And I believe between the retreats, that therapy that I did, as well as working the 12-step program, really allowed me to be the person that I am today. You know, so I started coming to these retreats 3 or 4 times a year, and that crazy Catholic priest convinced me to leave my job of 17 years working for the airlines in Washington, D.C., to leave all of that, to come and work at Caron Treatment Centers. And, you know, he tried for many years and I kept saying, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. And finally, it just felt right. And so, so I did. I left everything in Washington, sold everything, and took a big pay cut to come and work here. And it's kind of interesting as I took an entry-level position and the only openings they had was to work with adolescents. And I didn't want to work with adolescents because I was terrified to be around a bunch of adolescent boys, because, you know, the first day I walked in, like all of those old feelings were right there. But, you know, the adolescents today are definitely more accepting than they were back in the 80s. But just like, you know, Katie said, it's still there. It's absolutely still there. And so, you know, so I worked with the adolescents for many years. And one of the gifts of coming to work at Caron was that crazy Catholic priest handed those retreats to me. So he said, you're going to get to do these retreats now. So we still have them today 3 or 4 times a year. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I made the decision to change them because, you know, it's great to have these HIV retreats. However, people aren't dying anymore. There's medications there. And I wanted to broaden and open it up to more people for the entire LGBTQIA community. So we have these retreats 3 or 4 times a year at Caron, and we invite our patients that are in treatment that identify as LGBTQIA or people from the outside, and we bring them together for a safe place to be together to do this work. So also about 5 years ago, Caron decided that we needed to do more in regards to, I'm just going to say gay community, in regards to into the queer community. We needed to do more. So I was invited along with 4 other staff members we were on a task force to look at the treatment we did and to put some changes in place. And we did a lot of education. And, you know, just like Katie said, we had to work with our admissions department. And, you know, you don't know what you don't know until you're trained and understand it. And so today they have a very, very good understanding, especially with the transgender. And that's exactly what we train them, is that if you're not sure, just ask. It's much better to ask, you know, what pronouns do you prefer? And if you do make a mistake, just like you said, say thank you and move on. So, you know, so we've definitely evolved and grown. And today we have these retreats 3 or 4 times a year. We actually have a weekly Pride group on campus where we bring our LGBTQIA clients together to have a Pride group. We have a Pride luncheon, and we're actually able to take transgender patients. I was actually honored to be part of a team of people because, you know, we had our first transgender patient probably about 8 or 9 years ago, and it was a male to female, and admissions called me. They're like, well, we're not really quite sure what to do with this patient. And I said, you ask how they identify and you put them on the unit, because we're gender separate. You put her on the female unit. oh, okay. And it worked out fine. And we've even had transgender adolescents come into treatment and we're able to place them on the appropriate unit. And I can tell you, it works every time. It works every time. So, so again, I'm really blessed today to be part of this. I'm passionate, especially for the crystal meth addicts that come into treatment. I spend a lot of time with them. And right now, I believe that it's really, really hurting the gay community, especially with gay men. The crystal meth, it's at an all-time high right now, and it's really devastating this community. So it's great to be here with all the panelists. I like to call us warriors because I believe that we're fearless warriors, kind of like working together to fight the fight. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you. And I'm not sure who's next.
Caroline, do you want to jump in, or do you want to you want to go ahead and say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, my name is Dr. Caroline Finkel, and I go by she and her pronouns. I have been working with the adolescent population for about 10 years now, and I've been running a partial hospitalization program in Malvern, Pennsylvania for the past 4 years. And you know, I would say that one of the emerging trends that we consistently are seeing every single day are clients that are coming in and not really sure who they are and how they want to identify, and feeling really confused. And we are frequently doing a lot of education with parents around what it looks like to be affirming, and what it also looks like to, in a very gentle and kind way, talk about their fears and their concerns about their child's identity choices, how they're looking, etc. So I think that, you know, when I was kind of prepping for this, I was spending a lot of time thinking about the broader issues that bring us to this, which are really impacted by the system, which is what Katie spoke about this idea, and really what Tom was talking about in his own personal experience about this idea of, you know, feeling different and feeling like you are a round peg that's being shoved into a square hole, and what that must feel like on the playground, and what that must feel like as you're sitting in classes, and what that must feel like when you are invited over to a all-girls sleepover party, but you don't really know if you're a girl. Those are things that are really tough. Clients have come to me and talked about this idea of, you know, being in gym class and people saying like boys on this side and girls on this side, you know, and this idea that like, well, I kind of like feel like I'm both, and I don't really know what to do about that. Like, which side do I go on? And it's challenging, I think, as a white straight male to white straight female. That was like some kind of a Freudian slip, right? As a white straight female, to really just try my best to understand and know that I've never been through something like that, and I don't know what that feels like, but I absolutely have had feelings of being different. I have a learning disability that I dealt with my entire life, and I know what it's like to feel inadequate, and I know what it's like to feel different, and I know what it's like to really struggle at something that other people seem to just get. And I think that that's oftentimes what the teens that we're treating feel. I mean, I think that on a panel like this, my big message to the participants who are here is this idea that, you know, and I'm talking specifically about teenagers, but that teenagers need the space to explore different identities, and that there are identities that there are certain identities that they actively hide, right? And there are certain identities that they actively try and put in front. And there are certain identities that they didn't even know that existed until they meet somebody else that has that identity, and they think, wow, I can really relate to that. And it's really important to take those three different ways that kids might come to that identity and like respect it, right? I have so many parents that come to me that are like, so my kid came to Center for Families and she went by she, her, and now she's been at Center for Families with all of your kids that go by they, them, and that are all like, you know, like gender bender kids. And like, now she wants me to call her they. you know, and like, I'm like, well, it's not like about the other kids, like necessarily, it's that they're talking about something that they identify with, you know, and just trying to help parents to understand that and just trying to provide more education. But I think that it's really important as clinicians to validate parents' fears and concerns and have sessions with them by themselves and be like, this must be really weird to have your kid walk down the stairs and wear something completely different. Like, what is that like for you? And really like dig into that uncomfortability. I think that oftentimes when it comes to these types of situations, we tend to live in a society of shame. So what happens is that when a straight big macho dad who like loves the Eagles and like has a kid that's like, you know, used to be a football player and now he's wearing a dress, like blah, 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 you know, and it's like so in us to be like, you're wrong and he should be able to experience these things, and like, you know, you're just being incredibly invalidating and you're just part of the patriarchy, awful society. It's like, no, like that's really weird for him. Like this is out of his comfort zone, and like, can we just sit with him and like let him take out the uncomfortability on the clinician or on the family therapist without the kid present, right, to protect them, but really allow him to have that space to like be angry about this and be upset and feel grief and loss that you had this son that's now a girl, and what is that like? And those are the things that I think are really important when it comes specifically to treating this population, which is, you know, giving them the space. And again, this goes for both of them, right? Giving the teens the space to explore identities that they've hidden, identities that are emerging, or identities that they very much feel about, and giving the parents the space to feel angry, to feel grief and loss, and the education for the parents to be able to teach them the ways in which to best support their teenager, right? Because when they are supporting them and affirming them, we know that the suicides go down, right? And the truth is that I've never sat with a parent before where I have, you know, and I've had a lot of parents that have been pretty adamantly against the gender bender, non-conforming type of thing and just choose and all these things. But I've never sat with a parent and looked at them and said, I just want you to know that your approach to this is going to lead to more mental health issues and more suicide attempts and more issues. So you either change your approach to like save your child's life and like stop with all of this and just be affirming and be kind, and you can get angry and be like, give that all to me, I'm fine with that. Or like, you know, you can be that way and we can lower that risk, right? And give them some protective factors around that. And I've never sat with a parent that's like, yeah, I'd rather that like my kid be more, you know, more mentally ill. You know, like parents are very much when put into that state of like, okay, I really need to look at the education, look at the statistics and change my approach to this. And I've always found that that's just, you know, a really helpful way, but also allowing them that space to experience feeling sad, you know, and feeling grief. So that is my little spiel for tonight.
I'm up. So I'm really glad that I'm on this panel. My story's a little bit different. I came out 5 years ago, but I've known that I was gay for my whole life. But I'm still going through the process, right, of like fully accepting who I am. Like I'm confident in saying, you know, I'm a lesbian, I'm in recovery. However, when I step outside of either my friend circle, my sober supports, my family who I've been blessed with that have been extremely accepting, I'm immediately filled with fear. And that goes all the way back to my childhood. My entire childhood and my early adolescent years, going up until I finally seeked help for my addiction, was so much filled with like internalized homophobia. I never felt like I could actually be myself because I was so fearful of the reaction from the outside world. aside from using to cope with that, I engaged in really risky behaviors because I was trying to do anything I could to not fully look into the fact that I'm sexually attracted to women. I'm romantically attracted to women. I want to be with a woman. I pressed all of that down and replaced those feelings with drugs and alcohol, because drugs and alcohol can completely get rid of any of those impure thoughts that I felt like I had. Throughout my entire even recovery process, after I went to rehab, I went to detox and rehab, partial hospitalization treatment, intensive outpatient treatment, halfway houses, I still was scared. The first person I came out to was actually my counselor, but I didn't come out to her as a lesbian. I came out to her as bisexual because I was still scared of saying that I'm a lesbian. Because when it comes to being bisexual, in my head, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to say I'm bisexual because people will semi sort of accept me still, because there's a chance that I could be with a man, right? Because a man and woman is the only thing that is acceptable. Obviously, I've changed my thought patterns throughout discovering who I really am. But there was something interesting that I heard that I've been hearing and I've heard for my whole life. And I'm going to bring this point up because it's June, so it's Gay Pride Month. I've heard on multiple occasions people say, if there's a Gay Pride Month, why is there not a Straight Pride Month? And I think this is really important to bring up, because I think, especially for clinicians that are treating people that are in addiction, you know, a main point that we drive home is developing sober supports. You know, finding places where you can feel safe and supported and have people that can relate to you, right? Well, as a lesbian in the LGBTQIA plus community, you know, I need to find my supports too. And being a marginalized population in general can feel completely uncomfortable and unsafe. And I've spent my 5 years in recovery finally being able to accept myself and have pride in myself. So Gay Pride Month is for all of the individuals that have felt so unaccepted, fearful, not good enough, you know, potentially suicidal, being, you know, kicked out of their houses, not feeling like they have anybody that's on their side to feel like they finally have somewhere to feel safe. I'll kind of relate it back to my using, you know, throughout. I started using when I was 15. I started drinking and smoking weed, and that continuously progressed to alcohol, marijuana, benzos, and heroin. And I was also an addict that would just do anything that was put in front of me to try to get rid of feeling like who I really was, like, because who I really was wrong. Every time that I was using, I was pushing the real me down further and further and further. When I finally went into recovery and I met a counselor that I fully trusted and felt safe with, I finally felt like, okay, I'm in a place where I can be myself. And I really value that relationship that I had built with my counselor, because now I'm finishing up my master's in mental health counseling. So I'm doing my internship at Ethos with Mike Blanche and Patrick Dowling. And I'm recognizing that, like, I want to be that safe space for people, right? Like, but I also find it extremely important for me to continuously educate myself, because I don't know everything. Like, I identify as a lesbian, however, I don't speak for the entire community. And I have to continuously be aware of that, because sometimes in like a countertransference way, I want to sit with a client and be like, oh, you're a part of the LGBT community. Oh, I completely understand what you're going through. I empathize with you. Let me just tell you everything that I've been through, right? But like, you can't do that because it's not about me. It's about the client. The one thing though that I still think about is the fact that like when I'm out walking around with my girlfriend, I'm still looking around like everywhere I am to make sure that it's safe for me to hold my girlfriend's hand or like put my arm around her. That feeling that I've come so far, but then I'm pushed back every time that I go into a place that might be unsafe is so unsettling. And it's a really difficult thing to accept that there's continuous education that continuously has to happen. However, some people might not understand and might not accept it. And I have to accept that too. I'm not going to be able to convince everybody that they have to support my lifestyle or the LGBT community. However, I can educate and hope that maybe something that I'm saying is getting through. I think a big part of the reason why addiction is so much more prevalent in the community is because you're using with this intense fear of not feeling worth it. And you have all of these thoughts that societally were wrong. If you look in society and you look at ads, right, like it's starting to become more acceptable. It's starting to be seen more. But that doesn't mean that I'm still not full of fear. And I still, like, that fear wasn't valid. When I was using to stop thinking. I didn't want to have the feelings that I did. And I would act out and get into relationships with men that were extremely toxic because the way that they treated me is how I felt like I deserved to be treated anyways. I'm continuously learning, and I feel like I learned so much tonight. But I also think that, when I look at the counseling world and the LGBT community itself, with addiction coming in as clients, I think that there's a lot more that still needs to be done. I'm recognizing when doing my internship that I've noticed with clients that I've seen, it's not something that a lot of people really want to talk about fully. And educating ourselves and learning about, the difference between gender and sexuality, learning about how to properly ask about pronouns. Like, these are the things that we can take with us to impart to other clinicians so that every client that comes in, no matter how they identify or what their sexuality is, can feel like they're in a safe space. You're already coming in vulnerable if you're in early recovery. You're already coming in not knowing what your identity is or how to really live without the use of drugs and alcohol. So adding the sexuality, gender identity component on top of that is just bringing that person further and further and deeper into this intense fear that they're never going to be accepted. So that was my story / my experience / what I've been learning in my internship. But yeah, am I moving to Kim or am I going back? Okay.
That's awesome. Well, I don't know how to thank all of you. I really don't. I mean, to what your point just now, Liv, I think we have such a long way to go, but it's so comforting to know that all of you are working in this field. Olivia, your future clients are I'm happy for them already. But I I really want to thank all of you for your honesty and your insights and all of that. So thank you. A couple of questions that came in ahead of time, and then a couple that have come up since you started. Let's start with, well, somebody just asked for some clarification, and maybe Katie, I'll turn this back to you. The difference between gay and queer, if you want to, if you can maybe help with some of the distinction around that.
Absolutely. So, you know, queer was a pejorative up until the past couple of years that has been reclaimed by the community. And you know, gay, when we're looking at gay, if we wanted to look at that identity specifically, gay men, right, and then lesbian women who are attracted to the same sex, right? But queer is the idea that you know, back to the Venn diagram that I was talking about with the sexuality and gender identity, right? Queer is the idea that we kind of break all of these barriers, or you know, and that you can identify, you can be, you know, someone who is assigned female at birth that is non-binary, you know, and presents masculine, right? But also is still attracted to men, and that's queer, right? But and women. It's just the breaking of the binary. It's the, you know, the fluidity among identities under that umbrella. It's the idea that we're always evolving and learning, and it's, you know, it's also about a movement, right? When we look at, you know, this month being Pride Month, you know, this is a Pride Month that it's unlike anything I've experienced. It's not, you know, Chipotle floats and Bank of America, you know, and cowboys, you know, wearing only, you know, thongs, right? It's people in the streets, you know, protesting for their Black and brown brothers and sisters. And the identity of queer is, you know, we're a family and we're going to fight for all of us across this umbrella. So, you know, my understanding is it's breaking that binary. It's about being a family and fighting for those in this LGBTQIA. You hear me slow down because I'm getting used to saying it. You know, and making sure that we all have equal rights. So it's an identity, it's a movement, it's a lot. You know, I think back to what's the difference, right? Queer theory, right? And what queer theory is about. It's about breaking all those binaries and you know, questioning everything and flipping things around and not conforming. So that would be my answer. And please, anyone else, feel free to kind of share with everyone how you view it. But that's my interpretation.
Thanks, Katie. I think that's helpful. Here's another question that came in pretty recently at registration. Are there any special thoughts for high school GSAs, which are Gay Straight Alliance, I believe, to help prevent substance abuse? And I don't know, I know some schools, I know the school district where my kids went, Happer Horsham, they had a Gay Straight Alliance, but I don't know that they ever got into any substance use talks. I would think just SAP programs, student assistance programs, probably have some kind of one or the other, or hopefully a combination of both. But you guys have any thoughts about Gay Straight Alliances in schools? Caroline, do you know much about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the idea around the Gay Straight Alliance is in and of itself a protective factor against substance use, right? So the idea is that I'm young, I just came out, and instead of sitting in my room thinking about how anxious I am about the things that kids have said to me or what my parents are going to say, or the fact that I feel like I'm never going to have a traditional wedding or a traditional family, I am instead going to this club and watching movies about, you know, Harvey Milk, and watching, you know, cool stuff and getting to know the culture that I'm going to be a part of as I get older. a lot of these clubs, like in general, tend to be protective factors for mental health issues or for substance use, because the idea is it's creating connection between teenagers and peers in a healthy way, right? Instead of connecting over like smoking a few bowls or going to a kegger, like they're connecting in a safe way. And I know that I've experienced with the teens that we treat that they're seeking out that connection that they could get from a GSA group, but they find it on Grindr and end up meeting up with somebody that's older than them, like on a dating app, right? And so if we were able to sort of drive them more towards these groups like GSA, we could potentially protect them from substance use or unhealthy behaviors and decisions. I know that when I was in high school, they had, what did they have? They had these like mainline, you guys know what I'm talking about. It's in Wayne. There were dances.
It's the Mainline Youth Alliance.
Right. Maya. Right.
Yeah.
So all my friends would be like, are you going to the Maya dance tonight? And I'd be like, totally. And we would all go to this like dance. And, I mean, again, like I didn't identify as being, I identified as an ally, but I loved it because everybody was super cool and they all dressed super cool and we had a lot of fun and nobody judged each other. And I never felt like, I felt like I was in a safe space instead of going to like a stupid DJ Howard dance, with like Devon Prep boys. No offense to the Devon Prep boys, but you get what I'm saying. It's like, just seemed a lot safer. So I definitely think that, as far as special thoughts go, the idea would be just to encourage any kid that's questioning to check out these types of groups.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Tom, do you want to address that question that came in about the opportunities for gay men to connect and meet one another? They mentioned that it had always been in the bar scene, but as you said earlier, not really the way things are going these days. And Caroline mentioned apps. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I came out, we didn't even, I'm going to really sound old, we didn't even have cell phones. They were like bricks that you had to carry around in a bag. So they weren't really too functional. So you went to gay bars and you went to gay clubs. That's kind of how you socialized. And, today a lot of the gay bars and especially the gay clubs are shutting down because people just aren't, going to them anymore. And a big part of it is because of the apps. And in some ways, dating apps are great. However, unfortunately, a lot of the gay apps are really used for sex and drugs. That's the bottom line, especially Grindr. I mean, I live in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and I could download Grindr on my phone right now and have somebody with crystal meth within 10, 15 minutes. That's how easy and quick it is. There's code words that identify I like to party and I like to party with drugs. So it's actually kind of sad that that's how it's evolved into today. And that's what and there's probably about 10 different apps similar to Grindr that are out there. And they're predominantly, used for hookups. I actually am lucky. There's actually an LGBTQ campground in Lehighton, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from where I live. So that's actually a fun opportunity to go and be around other queer people. And it's very inclusive and very diverse. There's a lot of various groups within the community that go there. So it's a lot of fun. However, there's a lot of drinking. There's the drug use, not so much, but there's a lot of drinking. And again, that kind of goes hand in hand, unfortunately, with the LGBTQ community. So.
Thanks, Tom. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Go ahead, Katie.
Can I add something? Yeah, I think when I think about, I was talking about queer being a movement, right? A lot of the young people that I work with, young people, especially now, right? Gen Z, their moral compass points so north, right? They want to get involved. They want to march. They want to talk about climate change, right? I think, and queerness inherently is part of that identity is being an activist, right? So I encourage a lot of my young people that I'm working with to sign up for, you know, community organizing, or, you know, activist meetups. And I mean, it is diverse. It's not all queer individuals, LGBTQIA individuals, but right, with the history of, you know, being gay in the United States, being queer in the United States, and the community's commitment to activism, that is a safe environment. It's something that individuals are passionate about outside of their gender identity or sexual orientation, and it's a great place to meet people and get involved and do some good. So that's always something that I say, you know, like, what are you passionate about in terms of activism? And not everyone has that fire in them and feels that, but a lot of the young people I work with do. And so kind of making them, you know, pushing them towards that. And a lot of the times they do find queer community within that, you know, especially depending on where that activism falls along the political spectrum, right? But I've had a lot of success with that. And I think that's just worth kind of noting.
Nice, thanks. I think that's a good segue into this question. While acceptance may be where we need to head, what is the real ultimate destination? Is it greater than acceptance? And if yes, then what and where? And there's an interesting response to this too, but I want to ask you guys to share your thoughts first. Is there something beyond acceptance that you think is the ultimate goal?
So my head right away kind of like internalized that, because I was thinking, is there something greater than acceptance? Well, yes, for everybody to feel safe, right? Like if I'm looking on the outside and I'm like thinking to myself, okay, I want everybody to accept my lifestyle and who I am. To be completely honest with you, I have no say in changing every single person's mind. You know, I would really like, and this is like me as a member of the LGBT community, but also just in general in the world, right? I would like to, I think beyond acceptance is just allowing others to live their life and feel safe and not scared for their life, right? I think that's really difficult and I think that's really challenging, but like, as was just talked about with like activism and everything, you know, getting involved with doing something or standing up for something that you believe in is pushing that acceptance in an acceptable way, right? Like you're not telling anybody, you're not looking somebody in the eye and saying, you have to believe what I believe. You're standing up for what you believe in to potentially impact others that might not have the same mentality as you do. That was my take.
I like that. That's great. And so it kind of, and along the same lines, this is a friend to many of us who's one of our attendees tonight. Following up on the previous comment, the moment that mattered for him and his daughter is when he shared with her how happy he was that she is queer, because the person she is now is so amazing and what she was always meant to be. She said that she felt celebrated. Is that the ultimate goal? Not only acceptance and support, but celebration.
I would, you know, thank you for sharing that, Kim, because that's where my head went, is celebration, right? Safety, of course, yeah, safety and celebration, right? I'm thinking, you know, one of the most rewarding things as a clinician is to move the needle with the parents from tolerating, questioning, to accepting, to celebration, right? Because you know, I'm an individual who's queer and who's sober, right? And I remember, and here's the only thing I can compare it to, right? Because we're talking about substance use and because we're talking about the LGBTQIA population, right? I remember individuals when I went into 12 steps saying, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, and right? And so many people are like, what does that mean? That's so annoying, right? I've said to parents, right, you know, that have said, like, my kid is trans. I said, congratulations. Right, your kid feels safe enough to share with you who they are, right, and how brave they are to go against the gender binary, which is so embedded to every single thing that we do. You have raised an individual who is brave enough to live in their truth, and they feel safe enough with you. Maybe that parent is probably thinking the same thing I was thinking when I went into 12 steps at first, like grateful recovery. But when you move the needle on that individual from tolerance to acceptance to celebration, and they're celebrating their queer child, their gay child, their lesbian child, their trans child, whatever, that's incredibly powerful, and I think the ultimate goal. Yeah.
I love it. So great. Question about LGBT 12-step meetings. Are they out there? Probably not in abundance, I'm guessing. Or are they hard to find? Or are they easy to find?
I can speak to that because I got sober going to LGBTQ meetings. There's the William Way Center in Philadelphia is pretty phenomenal. I actually don't know if the meeting still exists, but Night Owl was 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. And I used to go there every night because I couldn't sleep in early sobriety. So I went there every night and it was great. The art in there is awesome. They just have like display, every week was different. Sometimes it was penises that were up, all different types. Other times it was just people that are naked. It was great. I thought that was the coolest. But it's a really, really good meeting. There are, when you go to, AA, and look at meetings, they will specify if they are gay or LGBTQIA meetings. So they are relatively easier to find, I found, and they tend to be pretty awesome.
Even here in Berks County, we have an LGBTQIA meeting every Sunday night, and we actually take the clients at Karen to it. Not right now, in the midst of a pandemic, nobody leaves the campus, but normally they do, and it's really great because there's a lot of great recovery, and it's a very accepting group. And if people kind of break the rules of a 12-step meeting, they don't get shunned as that happens in meetings sometimes. So if you crosstalk or you ask questions, everybody's really open, and it's great. It's great for people in early recovery to experience a safe place. So they are everywhere.
Yeah, West Philly's got a trans and gender expansive specific AA/NA meeting, and I love it because they use all gender inclusive language when they read the big book, with the 12 steps, right? So it's such a safe place, and such a great community.
I'd be super grateful to all of you if you could send me any links that you can to some of the things you just mentioned, and I'll get them on that resource page, our follow-up page. So thanks for that. And we also had the question about resources for parents. And of course, there's PFLAG, but it's not necessarily for substance use. And I know when I started reaching out to try to answer this question, and it actually came from somebody who I thought would have the answer to this question, but I was hoping to find some groups where there is that convergence of SUD and the LGBT population, but I'm not necessarily finding them. You guys have any ideas about resources for family members? All right, I guess we have to work on that. And I have a question for you guys too. Somebody had asked about, the access to treatment for the transgender population, but I'm just wondering in general what your experience has been, whether it's personal or through clients, patients you've worked with, about the barriers to accessing treatment for substance use disorder if you're from the LGBTQIA+ community.
I think a lot of people are, especially queer individuals, for reasons like, Tom,
Yeah, I appreciate that, Katie. You're right. I mean, I can only speak for what I know, and that's Karen. I work closely with the admissions staff now, and they do a really great job. But there are times when the potential clients are still fearful. And so just last week, I got a call from admissions asking if I would call this gentleman from Washington, D.C. that was ready to come into treatment, but he was fearful. He had a lot of questions. And so, I've worked with a lot of gay men coming into treatment, so I was able to call him and answer his questions. And, you can't make guarantees. Like, I can't guarantee that all of the other clients are going to be, affirming and caring. But what I can tell you is that there's a zero tolerance for any type of whether it's racial, sexual orientation, zero tolerance, and people will be discharged immediately if they are, if they're inappropriate. So, and I'm actually going to probably meet with him at some point in the next week or so. And he did make it in. So, so if our staff are unsure, they'll bring in an expert, and not saying I'm the expert, but they might even bring in a psychologist or somebody from the clinical staff to speak to the patient. But it's interesting that as I was speaking to him, in the year 2020, I'm like, that was me in 1995. It's still there. It's still there. So still got a lot of work to do.
Definitely. Well, I think this was a really good start, and hopefully people will share this once it's recorded and available. So just a little feedback from some attendees. I'm so appreciative for everyone's candor and insights. I learned so much and can utilize what I've learned this evening to my at-risk teen clients. I appreciate all of your time. So any last thoughts from anybody? I really appreciate all of your time and the thought you put into this, and again, your transparency and trying to move that needle a little further in the right direction, right? Thank you guys so very much. I really appreciate it. And to our attendees, please do take our survey, and this video will be on that follow-up page by morning. And we're going to try to get as much additional information on that follow-up page as possible. Thank you all so much. Have a really wonderful evening. Take good care. Good night.